Yes, certainly it's an honor tonight to be able to stand before you to tell you about what I believe is an amazing journey. If you will, Confucius says that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step. And what I've done is I've broken down this amazing journey into 3 phases. Phase number 1 is going to be the time that I spent in my childhood and being reared. Phase number 2 will be the period of time that I spent in the military. And phase number 3 will be the time that I've spent in the ministry. Phase number 1 began when I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in February the 25th of 1972. Well, about 2 months after I was born there, what happened is that my mom left and she got into some trouble. And I'm quite sure she went to go see some of your friends that are in Chicago. At any rate, she became incarcerated, went through a process. 2 days later, they found myself and my older sister, who was 4 years old at the time, left alone there in the house. And so my aunt had come over, she found us there in the house, and she brought us to live with my grandmother, who lives in a place called Oneida, Arkansas. Now, if you can imagine, if you will, David, if you could just picture in your mind for a second a small town of about 116 people. Todd, they had woe signs, if you will. Woe signs, because most people didn't have cars, they only had horses. Anybody know what a woe sign is? All right, so at any rate, I lived there until I was about 18 years old. At 18, I moved from there. I went into the military, United States Army. I became a combat engineer. And I was stationed at about 5 different duty stations, but the one that I really liked the most was Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. While I was in Hawaii, I was stationed in places, if you will, like Japan. I went to Guam. I traveled to Fiji, and I also had the opportunity to travel to Australia. Wonderful places, and I really liked it. As a matter of fact, I would have really liked to have just stayed there, Larry, the rest of my military career, but unfortunately they wouldn't let me do that. So, John, I went on down to Fort Benning, Georgia. While I was there at Fort Benning, I had the opportunity to meet my mentor, which would take me into the 3rd phase, if you will, of my amazing journey. This 3rd phase, if you will, was the place where I began to learn that skills like determination, if you will, stick-to-itiveness. I learned that it wasn't the size of the, if you will, the dog that's in the fight, it's the size of the fight that's in the dog. And that's what Mark Twain said. I really like that quote. But at any rate, afterwards, while I was there at Fort Benning, I met Bishop Skinner. I spent time with Bishop Skinner there, and he began to nurture me and help me to mature and help me to become who I am now. Well, while I was there in Fort Benning, I got out of the military. After getting out of the military, if you will, I traveled to Nashville, Tennessee, spent some time in school. After school there in Nashville, Tennessee, I went down to Memphis, and I was doing some internships. Well, one day while I was doing my internships, guess what happened? I got a phone call from one of my friends, Keith Miller, who's a pastor here in Sarasota. And about that time, he says, well, will you come down and do a Saturday discipleship seminar and a Sunday morning service? Well, this is where it gets interesting. During my Sunday morning service, I'm there, just imagine, if you will, I'm standing there, I'm attempting to preach God's Word, I'm doing my best to deliver my best sermon, and all of a sudden there's a young lady who's sitting in the back of the room, and she holds up a sign. And the sign that she's holding up, if you can just imagine, guys, you guys know what I'm saying. This young lady holds up, she says, you're the most handsome man I've ever seen before in my life. I'd love to marry you, live the rest of my life with you. And about that time, I figured, well, you know, I have nothing else to do with the rest of my life, so I'll go ahead and marry this young lady. She was looking pretty good, you know, she's looking pretty good, Todd. And so at any rate, that young lady is Valora. So 2 months later, I actually moved here to Florida, left everything that we were doing there in Memphis, and moved here to Florida. And in that process of those 2 months, the next couple of months, we founded a church, if you will. The name of our church is Perfected Love International Fellowship. We're a multi-ethnic, multicultural, non-denominational church, if you will. We've got members who are from Barbados, like Miss Sybil and her daughter Marcia, who sit in the back of the room. And we've also got members from Puerto Rico, from, if you will, from the Virgin Islands. I learned the other day during a meal that we have Indo-Trinis and Afro-Trinis, which I'd never known that there were 2 sides to Trinidad. But at any rate, these are the things that I've learned since I've been a pastor there, and it's really been an amazing journey. I'll leave it with this. My discovery throughout this amazing journey is that there is no single event in a person's life, whether it be a success, a failure, a victory, or a loss, which can, if you will, define the sum total of who that person is. However, it is the entirety of the life, and thus all the events, the losses, the failures, the successes, which culminate into who we really are. Furthermore, throughout this life, I've learned how to persevere despite the odds. I've also learned that it's neither that success nor failure is dependent upon what somebody else says or thinks or feels about you. More so, it depends upon what you say, what you think, and what you feel about yourself, and what you determine to do about it. Mr. Toastmaster.